Prime Minister Mark Carney had come to Armenia for a 3-day visit, from May 2nd through May 4th. But his real time for direct talks with Armenian leaders was only about 20 hours. 20 hours before the start of the 8th European Political Community Summit, which brought nearly 50 heads of state and government to the Armenian capital. You might hear that and think, 20 hours is nothing, just a short, polite visit, a photo chance wrapped in fancy diplomatic words. But that view misses something important. What is happening in Yerevan is not just a polite visit. It is the clear front edge of a much longer, much quieter strategic plan. Canada is moving itself into a new place in the South Caucasus. It has been doing this step by step, carefully, for years. Let us go back to the basic ideas and understand why this area matters so much right now. Armenia is a small, landlocked, mountainous country. It sits at the meeting point of 4 of the world's most important neighbors. To its west is Turkey, a NATO member with old historical problems toward Yerevan and close military links to Baku. To its south is Iran. To its north and east are Russia and Azerbaijan. Every choice made in Yerevan sends waves out across oil and gas routes, military partnerships, and big power plans. These waves are much bigger than the country's small size. For most of the time after the Soviet Union ended, Armenia's foreign policy had one main direction: Moscow. It let Russian military bases stay on its land. It relied on Russian natural gas. It stayed safe under the protection of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, the Russian-led group meant to work like NATO for the old Soviet lands. Yerevan was not just close to Russia. By any fair measure, it was Russia's most trusted partner state in the whole Caucasus area. That setup broke apart with clear and painful truth in 2020. Azerbaijan started a military attack to take back Nagorno-Karabakh, the disputed area under Armenian control since the early 1990s. Armenia asked Moscow for help. Moscow did not come. The war lasted 44 days. Armenia lost. And then in September 2023, Azerbaijan started an operation that lasted less than 24 hours. It led to the complete emptying of the area. About 120,000 ethnic Armenians ran away in just a few days. Moscow, which had placed peacekeeping soldiers in the area under the 2020 ceasefire agreement, said and did nothing important. The protector had not only failed, it had stood by and watched. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, who gained power through a popular uprising in 2018, has since worked carefully to loosen the ties holding Yerevan to Moscow. Armenia stopped joining CSTO training exercises. It started talking openly about joining more with Europe. It let an EU civilian watching team set up along the tense border with Azerbaijan. These are not small signals in a place where Russia has usually seen any move toward the West as a serious threat. And into this open space stepped Canada. The Canadian presence in Armenia has grown in ways that would have seemed impossible 10 years ago. In 2018, then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau became the first Canadian leader ever to visit Armenia. He went to the Francophonie Summit in Yerevan. In 2023, Ottawa opened a full Canadian embassy in the Armenian capital. And then came the step that should have received much more world notice than it did. Canada became the first country outside the European Union to join the EU mission in Armenia. The civilian watching operation was placed physically along the Armenian border with Azerbaijan. Read that again. A country in North America is the only non-EU nation with people physically standing on the ground along one of the most tense and disputed borders in Eurasia. That is not just symbolic diplomacy. That is real strategic placement of a kind that takes years to prepare and brings real results. Christopher Waters, an international law professor at the University of Windsor, told CBC News that Armenia's location and its direction make it a country of real and growing importance for Ottawa. He described the conditions as good for stronger links in education, business, and security. He talked about Armenia as a democratic state in a tough area. The country sits across energy routes carrying Caspian oil and gas westward to European markets. It borders Iran. It sits inside the working area of Turkish and Russian military power at the same time. There is no such thing as unimportant land in this part of the world. Now, Canada's work here has not been without problems. Honesty means facing those problems straight on. During the 2020 war, camera parts made by L3 Harris Westcam, a company based in Burlington, Ontario, were found in Turkish-made Bayraktar drones. Azerbaijan used those drones with great success against Armenian forces. Canada first stopped the related export permissions in October 2020. A formal government study later found clear proof that the parts had been used in ways not allowed by their export rules. Ottawa canceled the permissions in 2021. The stop stayed until early 2024, when it was lifted after Turkey approved Sweden's request to join NATO. That order of events matters. The start of exports again came in a situation clearly connected to Turkey meeting a NATO duty. Armenian watchers saw the deal-making side of it. The event left a feeling of mistrust that Carney's government has tried to fix through steady diplomatic work. There is also the case of Bagrat Galstanian, an Armenian Apostolic Church archbishop who holds dual Canadian-Armenian citizenship. Galstanian became a well-known opposition leader in 2024. He led a movement called the Holy Struggle. He publicly said he was ready to replace Pashinyan as prime minister, even though his Canadian citizenship made him legally unable to hold that office under Armenian law. Armenian officials arrested Galstanian in June 2025, along with more than a dozen helpers, on charges of planning to take power. Global Affairs Canada confirmed they talked with local officials, but they cited privacy reasons and would not give more details. Canada has a direct interest at the citizen level in the internal political matters of Armenia. That situation stays active. These problems do not remove the strategic reasons for Canadian work. They make it harder, and they require real responsibility that goes beyond official statements. But they do not change the basic math of what is at risk. Alan Whitehorn, Professor Emeritus at the Royal Military College of Canada in Kingston, told CBC News that Armenia's military schools stand to gain a lot from closer links with Canadian ones. He pointed to Canada's top military colleges as good examples for the school changes Armenia is trying as it moves its armed forces away from Russian ways of thinking. Armenia already joins NATO's Defense Education Enhancement Program, and Canada helps with that work. But Whitehorn says the next clear step is a direct two-country defense education link. Military education forms military thinking. Military thinking forms how armies fight, how they prepare, and most importantly, how they see who their friends and enemies are. If Canada becomes a main partner for building institutions for an Armenian military that is rebuilding itself away from Russian rules, it places Canadian influence deep into the long-term school culture of that force. This is influence measured across many generations of officers, not across one budget year. Rob Hubert of the University of Calgary made a point that goes to the center of what Carney's attendance at the European Political Community Summit really means. Hubert noted that the simple fact of Armenia hosting this meeting is itself a message aimed at Moscow. Putin has spent years building a story in which Western groups reaching toward his borders count as a danger that needs an answer. The EPC summit in Yerevan, with Canadian involvement, is happening just over the mountains from Russian land. Hubert's view is clear. The West is showing through being there, not through big announcements, that it will work with any country wanting a Western partnership. It does not matter where that country sits on Russia's favorite map of control. The lack of a Russian part in the EPC setup is the most important message the summit sends. Canada's presence makes that message stronger. Now, step back and see the full picture. Canada has been showing, through real actions instead of through speeches, a view of itself as a connecting middle power. It is not a country whose foreign policy ends at the Atlantic edge or simply follows Washington's choices. It is a country able to keep steady work going across many areas. It links North American skills with European group structures in places that were, until recently, far from Western reach. Armenia is one point in that network. The Arctic, where Canada is building up its military strength in answer to Russian and Chinese actions, is another. The Indo-Pacific is a third. These are not separate tasks handled alone. They show one basic idea about what Canada is choosing to become as the world order changes itself. The idea is that Canada is not a regional power with nice worldwide dreams. It is a strong middle power, claiming real reach across many areas. And it plans to use that reach on purpose. Ottawa has many times called for the release of Armenian political prisoners held by Azerbaijan. This position has stayed the same across both the Trudeau and Carney governments. Waters says that this kind of steady support for principles, when combined with real people on the ground instead of only words, gives Canada a believable right to act as an honest helper. It is a country able to use pressure, where bigger powers either do not want to or cannot act without starting a bigger fight they cannot manage. So, what does Carney actually do in 20 hours in Yerevan? He meets with Pashinyan and shows that the strong commitment continues at the top level of government. He joins the EPC summit as the only non-European leader in the history of that group to get an invitation. This strengthens the message that Canada is no longer treated only as an Atlantic partner. Instead, it is included as a necessary player in European security structures. He stands in a capital city that sits between Iran and Russia and Turkey and Azerbaijan. He lets the picture speak before a single word of the official statement is released. None of this feels big in the moment. There is no mutual defense agreement. There is no announced sending of Canadian military forces. Diplomacy at this level rarely makes big headlines. It builds up slowly. It grows stronger. It creates real situations on the ground that future governments take as starting points instead of new choices. What is happening in Yerevan in the first days of May 2026 is the buildup of 10 years of careful Canadian choices. Each one could be defended on its own small reasons. But together, they make a strategic position that would have seemed impossible when Trudeau first got off a plane in this city 8 years ago. The country Moscow needs to watch most closely in the Caucasus right now is not an EU member state. It is not a NATO ally with troops placed forward. It is a North American middle power that opened an embassy 3 years ago, joined a border-watching mission, and just sent its prime minister to a summit that no leader outside Europe had ever been invited to join. Russia does not need to be named in Carney's official words for the Kremlin to understand what is being said. The list of guests for the European political community says it clearly enough. The country missing from that list knows exactly what the presence of every other guest means. 20 hours. That is the short runway. But the long flight path it sits on has been under construction for years. And it does not end in Yerevan.